I'm retired Battalion Chief Larry Cockman, Chairman of the Greensboro Fire Department History Book Committee. The American Fire Service is rich in tradition and culture. A firefighter's life is filled with many emotional highs and lows. Stories of major fires, national disasters, medical calls, firehouse living, and family life are often verbally shared from one generation to another. Many times, these stories are lost forever when a firefighter passes away. In an effort to preserve these stories, in 2019, the Greensboro Fire Department History Book Committee launched a new program of recording audio-video of our retirees' lives. These stories will be shared on our website, gfhbc.org. In 2020, we did not record because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Please listen as these firefighters share their life experiences with all of us.
Okay, my full name is Bradley Curtis Cox, but that's only if you meet me through my family. Otherwise, on the fire department for 30 years, I was Brad. I'm 68 years old, was on the department from 75 to 2004, and I retired as a deputy chief. Yeah, I was born and raised in Greensboro. Matter of fact, the roots go deep into the mill village. Mom and Dad both grew up in the mill village. Dad right beside the Revolution Mill, and my mother in the White Oak area. So, yeah, I'm a descendant of lint heads. Did some time myself in the mills, during the summertime. I actually had two relatives on the fire department. One when I came on, and that was Jerry Cox. Jerry was pretty instrumental in me getting on. I wanted to be a cop, and I actually contemplated going up and putting in an application for about a year. When I finally did go, I found out I was colorblind. They tried to get me through the test 3 times. Back in those days, you walked in the front door, there was a lieutenant sat in the office to the left. Sat down with him for a few minutes, and I was heartbroken. I mean, it really did. It broke my heart because it'd taken me a long time to come to that conclusion. That night, Jerry and his wife happened to be visiting my parents. And I was going to school during the day and working as a security guard at night. So Jerry calls me at the place I was a security guard at. I actually had a phone there. He said, "Have you ever thought about the fire department?" It had never crossed my mind. So I applied, based upon his advice. And then later on, after I'd been on some years, Bill Brown came on, who's my brother-in-law. So I've had 2 relatives on through the years. I was still in college trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I've always envied those kids that walked out of high school knowing exactly what they wanted to do in college. I went to college to play ball. And after that didn't pan out, dropped out of a 4-year school, which was Appalachian State, and was just taking some classes in a local community college. And like I say, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And the police department had been on my mind, and that didn't pan out, so a little bit of advice from a close friend, a good relative, and I wound up in the fire department. Very fortunate. Jobs were tight in 75. There was 500 of us that applied for 16 jobs, and I was extremely lucky. The process was you went to the Employment Security Commission. We took a series of written tests, mostly to determine mechanical skills. And then we did some dexterity testing. And then from that point on, I think there was an interview with Chief Kent, who was acting training supervisor at that time, Chief Osborne. I think he had a heart attack, and I don't think he ever returned. And Kent interviewed us. We did a few exercises, a few things out on the drill ground, and then I can't remember how much longer. It was an interview with Chief Powell, who was deputy chief at that time, and then a determination was made, and that's how I was hired. The reason they hired us was they were getting ready to open Station 15 out on Vandalia Road. So they hired us 16, and I didn't know it at the time, but the attrition rate in training was about 15 or 20%. So they had figured that in. Training was, it was very unique the first few weeks. I think all of us had this reverence toward the fire service. You're hesitant to do things. The trucks, the equipment, all that. You'd seen this stuff on television, but to actually start being expected to work with it and do the job and touch those things, it was a little surreal at first. But Chief Kent brought you back to reality real quick. Matter of fact, it was Chief Kent, and they brought at that time Captain Hilliard from Truck 4 out there to work with him to send us to the recruit training. So it was Captain Hilliard and Chief Kent, and they both were intimately involved day in and day out. In those days, when you were hired, you were required to drive a straight drive transmission. We went through training for 9 or 10 weeks, and then we were done. But the department was getting ready to test hose. So they decided to keep us out there to test hose for the entire department. They sent someone in Larry Borders up to Central Station to get the old international pickup. Well, little did we know, and whoever was with Larry, I can't remember, they realized Larry couldn't drive a straight drive. He almost drove it down that coal chute. It was at old Central Station, jumping it out of the garage. So we taught Larry how to drive a straight drive vehicle, hose testing. He would drive, we'd make him drive the pickup around the drill ground, and we'd pick the hose up and load it in the back. And that's how Larry learned how to drive a straight drive. I don't know if Kent and Chief Hilliard ever caught wind of that, but up until that point, Larry could drive a straight drive. Yeah, exactly when. I remember when we finally graduated, finally left, you felt like you could eat nails. There were some guys in the class that had been through boot camp, had been in the military. They used to tell us, they said, the only difference between this and boot camp is they let you go home in the evenings and on the weekends. But there was a sense of accomplishment when you walked out. I'd played sports my entire life, so being part of a team was something I always enjoyed. And we had that atmosphere in training, and you quickly developed that once you got out on the line. First permanent assignment is, I mentioned that they hired us at Station 15. So we were all sent on different shifts to Central Fire Station. And back in those days, they would do what they called, you had rovers. So we were considered rovers about the first 6 weeks or so until they opened Station 15. So I was assigned to Central Station. I'd be farmed out. I spent a lot of time at Station 3, which was a fantastic station. Met you there. Just a community station, you know how it was back in those days. I went to 11, worked some there. I worked at 14. But in October, sometime in October, I was permanently assigned to Central Fire Station on Engine 1. Captain was Jack Cope. Kind of odd. I grew up with his kids. We went to school together. Didn't know Jack until I was assigned to Engine 1. Tommy Morrison had just made captain, so Joe Smith was my driver and Don Bynum was the other firefighter on the back. But Engine 1, Engine 2, Truck 1, Truck 2, that house was a fantastic place to work. They had just built halt hours. We would ride on Sundays 5 or 6 or 7 calls a day because the smoke detectors were in place too close to the kitchens. So, they could burn toast and the smoke detector would go off and we'd have to ride a call. So, I had been on not very long and we had rode a call up there and we'd come back to the truck after checking it out and Jack says, get up here and drive us back. So, driving a straight drive is one thing, double clutching is another thing, and we're sitting on an incline. So Jack says drive us back, and I'm going to jump in the cab and do what I can. Well, I jumped Jack and everybody else up that incline. I don't know how many times we bounced, but it was enough to throw everything in the cab, all over the cab. And he handled it well. He didn't get upset. If Jack could have a temper sometimes, we all saw it, but he was good as he could be to me. I only had Jack for a couple of months because they rotated officers in January. So I lost Jack in January. Next captain was Steve Faust. And as you know, Steve's Green Beret,
Right.
straight-laced,
Right.
all this stuff. He was about a foot shorter than me, but he nicknamed me his bouncing baby boy, and it stuck the entire time I was at Central Station. If you talk to Joe Smith today, that's the first thing that come out of his mouth is the bouncing baby boy. There was always something going on. People were always into something. Anything that you might be interested in or not interested in, you know, there's such a variety up there. One time that stands out in my mind, we had a garden hose, a section of garden hose, and we used to clean the upstairs bathroom with. You just hook it on the faucet and you can rinse it down, it drains in the floors and all that stuff. Well, Joe Smith had that thing in the bedroom, and I caught him running it from his bunk behind my bunk to the next bunk behind the radiator, and the next bunk was Sid Ray. Well, Joe filled that thing full of baby powder. So that night, Sid and I were usually till the last to go to bed. And you know, the dormitory up there. So, you know, you kind of creep in if you're one of the last ones. Sid and I laid down, and I heard something go, ooh. And Sid heard it too. And that happened 2 or 3 times. And finally, Sid, I see him looking behind his bed at the radiator. So he rolls over, he's on hands and knees, got his nose stuck right down through the headboard of the bed at that radiator. Well, Joe blew. And that white powder went all over the room. Sid flipped almost over the end of the bed. And I laughed for a long time. I couldn't get over that one because Joe worked half a day to do that. I remember when we got the yellow turnout gear, and that's when that Chief Heater got tagged with the Big Bird thing. But later on, I was involved in a piece of that. Chief Heater was out of town for a week, and the mechanics, J.R. McKenzie and Tommy, wanted to get in his office. And at that time, I was over operations, and Clarence was one of the assistant chiefs downstairs that reported to me. And I made the mistake of letting them in. I knew what they wanted to do. So they hung these huge, yellow ostrich feathers, several other things in there. I think they even might have had a dog, a big bird in there. So when Clarence came back and he went in his office, needless to say, he was not very happy. And I took quite a ton of lashing because I owned up to it and admitted that I let him in his office. But it was a good prank, I thought. As far as cooking goes, I sucked. I was awful. I was very fortunate in that I was always at a 4-company station or a 2-company station, and you were paired up to cook. At Central, we cooked by company. So we had some good cooks. So what I would do, I did a lot of meal prep. You know, I'd cut the vegetables up and do this and do that, you know, but I was not a cook, so to speak. Then when I went to Station 7, I was paired with Bobby Shane, and Bobby could cook. So there was very few times I actually had to make a meal myself. I always told people the biggest emphasis to make battalion chief was so I wouldn't have to cook anymore because I didn't have the patience for it. I didn't have the interest in it. But, you know, push come to shove, you know, I could throw hot dogs together, I could do spaghetti, a few things like that. Just like it's important to eat together as a family. You know, these people that you work with know you, in some cases, better than your own family does. And the way you build that trust and that teamwork and all those things associated with this job, a lot of that happens at the kitchen table. Central Station, you know, was fantastic. You had the big long table and then you had the trough in the back. And that was a rite of passage to move to the trough. But just the conversations, you know, you get to know each other, about each other's wives, their children, their lives, their backgrounds. It was a part of firehouse living that was just essential, I thought, to the job. And to develop those relationships, because you put your life in those person's hands and they put theirs in yours. And you build that trust and that companionship and that camaraderie, I guess you would say. Yeah, a lot of that at the kitchen table. One of the things I remember is when we first started hiring women, we had also started buying 100% synthetic hose, so we didn't need the hose rooms anymore. So we started converting a lot of those hose rooms to bedrooms for the women. Well, the women complained. And they complain because when that call comes in the middle of the night and everybody starts waking up, you start having that conversation. Well, I know where that street is. There's a hydrant right there on the corner. All those conversations are taking place as you're getting up and you're getting dressed, getting ready to get on the truck. And the women complained that they were left out of those conversations. So what evolved from that was, the women were moved into the dorms with the guys. Everybody slept, in the t-shirts and the long shorts and all that stuff. And I think they were on to something there. They should be part of the whole situation, the whole lifestyle. I'm sure the cubicles were nice. I can remember and you did too. We went back and got our degrees after we came on. There were times at Station 7, I actually studied in the furnace room to get ready for an exam the next day. Because the guys were, watching TV, playing ping pong, basketball, whatever it may be, and you needed to find a place by yourself. So I'm sure the cubicles are probably good for that. But my personal preference, and I was a fire chief in another department for 8 years. The last station I built was private rooms for each individual. Not that I agreed with it, but that's just the way things are nowadays. Off, you went in, you did the normal routine, you made your beds, you changed, you checked your trucks out. But then and most of the stations I worked at, we always had Sunday school. Somebody would come in, from outside and teach Sunday school. So I always participated in that. And then from that point on, it was your time unless you wrote a call. Families would come in, not all of them, but they would come in and bring lunch in some cases, or dinner, whatever the case may be. You didn't cook those days. I'll never forget Station 7 one day. Woody Parrish, Arlie, Rick, and I, we decided to order pizza, and we said, let's get some jalapeno peppers on those pizzas. Well, I never had jalapeno pepper before. I'll never eat them again either. This stuff is burning my mouth before I can even get it chewed, So, but Sundays were they were relaxed days. You could take a nap in the afternoon. Some of the guys would, some wouldn't. You took a nap at your own risk, because if somebody was awake, there's no telling what might happen to you while you're asleep. I remember my first call and my first fire. First call was out of Central Station. It was on truck 2. Robert Atkins was driving truck 2. If I remember correctly, and I have a hard time, I think it was a 48 American La France. It was an open cab. It was a small cab. And I have never experienced a ride like that in my life. He could drive that truck. And we rode somewhere down in Irving Park, false alarm. Ended up coming back when we made it all the way there. First fire of any consequence, I was at Station 3. And the lint hole came in the middle of the night. And I'd never been to the lint hole. And Sid Ray and I were on the back of Engine 3, 2 rookies. We hadn't been on 2 months. Bill Long was the captain, and Bobby Shane was the driver. And we went down to the lint hole. And truck 7, truck 4, engine 7 were there. And you go down this long flight of steps, and you're underneath there. And there's water up to about your knees. There's lint all over the place, and it's burning here and there. We first went down, we followed, engine 7 and truck 4. These guys are the vets, they know what's going on. So we go down, we don't have air packs on. So the longer we were down there, the worse it got, the smoke. So they pulled us out and told us to put air packs on. So by that time, I think most of us were suffering from smoke poisoning. So we'd go back down. When we go back down, I get a nozzle. I'm pulling that thing around, and the more I pull it around, the sicker I get. So finally to the point, I feel it coming. And before I could get my face piece off, I've thrown up at it. So here I am, 2 months on, I'm a rookie. I've thrown up in my face piece. Al Stewart is a captain on Truck 4, and I grew up with his sons. He's known me since I was that tall. And I'm thinking, what a wuss. So Al and someone else is helping me up the steps, one under each arm. We get to the top of the steps, and Bobby Shane says, there's O2 right over there. Well, when I look over there, there's not only one under each arm of Sid Ray, there's one under each leg. So I'm feeling much better about myself because Sid's in worse shape than I am. But just got too much smoke and learned a valuable lesson that day. You don't always follow the vets, they may take you the wrong way. 3 calls stand out in my mind. Very first call that I think any of the squad's got. I know it was one of the very first. It was Steve Fowl and I. We wrote a CPR, and the guy survived. And you heard all these stories. It's only effective so many times, and but he survived. The second one was elderly lady, middle of the night, lived by herself, late 70s, early 80s. She was conscious, but they wanted me to ride in the back, just in case she came in. Well, you're riding back there, you're not doing CPR or anything, so there's really nothing to do, but got to looking at her, and I could tell she was scared to death. So I held her hand, and she held mine back. And we rode all the way to the hospital that way. And got to the ER, backed in, pulled the card out, or the stretcher out. When the wheels hit the ground, she coded. And she didn't make it. And I always think of all the things I did through the years, she had somebody with her when she left here. That I hope it meant something to her.
Sure it did.
Yeah, the other call was right before I came off the squad, right before I got promoted. It was good timing for me to get promoted at that point. 16-year-old driver, 15-year-old passenger, and they went to McDonald's one Sunday afternoon. Just a 16-year-old on the drive. And it had rained just a little bit, and we hadn't had rain in a long time. The roads were, how slick they can get from the gas and the oil. And the kid pulled out, and we had plenty of eyewitnesses said he was not speeding, but he hydroplaned across the road, wrapped it around a telephone pole on the passenger side. And Rick and I got there in the EMS, and we had to cut him out. And so for several minutes there, the 15-year-old was laying in the 16-year-old's lap. The 15-year-old was dead. And the 16-year-old, that's the only time I think I've ever seen true emotional shock. Because he couldn't get away from that kid. That kid was laying in his lap. And I've often thought about him through the years, what kind of life he's had after having experienced that. Because I've never felt so sorry for someone in my life, because he was in a circumstance, he had done nothing wrong, and the whole world fell out from underneath him. 9/11, I think had a lot of positive effects on the fire service. Up until that point, I think the fire service was looked at as a necessary evil. A lot of people were under the impression, and you probably got asked this question just like I did, I bet y'all have some good checker players there. Because people were under the impression that all you did was sit around and wait for a fire to come in, which was, 100 miles from the truth. But people saw the fire service in a different light in the sacrifice that those guys made that day. I think they also saw the training the advanced training that the fire service has in so many different disciplines because of 9/11. 9/11 to me, that particular day, I was in my office and Bob Boss was upstairs on White Dignity. Bob came down the hall and he said, the plane's hit the World Trade Center. And we walked back to the conference room and we saw the second one hit. And from that point on, it was just a blur because it probably wasn't 45 seconds to a minute. I was called down to meet with David Gray, who was over the assistant chief over operations in the police department. Johnny was out of town. I think Danny was acting chief. It was phone calls and conversations and meetings, getting coordinated with PD and planning for what may occur in Greensboro, because a lot of folks didn't realize it. I mean, the tank farm was a huge issue. It was a target. We just had a school built out off New Garden Road, which was a terrorist target because there were a lot of kids going to school there, you know, from prominent Jewish families. Mm-hmm. So there was I didn't have time to think about it. I think more about 9/11 since I've retired and dwell on it more now than I did then. Because at that particular point in time, it was like Pearl Harbor, you know, just how did this happen? I can't believe this happened to us. And the only other thing I would say is, I do remember watching the screen and hearing the pass alarms. And you knew every alarm that you were listening to. We lost a firefighter. And that was an eerie sight. Oh, there was definitely one fire that changed the training objectives. And that was the Davie Street fire, 85. That led to our instant command system being adopted. Trying to make a long story short, Frank Jones had picked up Brunacini's instant command system before it was ever published. He had a notebook with that system. Brunacini had stolen it from California, but be that as it may, Randy Parrish and I, and then Paul Brooks and I, and Frank, we massaged it, you know, acclimated it to Greensboro fire. And we must have worked a year and a half on that. And Frank took the system to Chief Powell. And it must have sat on Chief Powell's desk almost a year. So, and you and I have talked about this. So Davie Street happens, and it'd been a few weeks, and I get a call from Chief Powell, and he says, Firehouse Magazine wants an article on the Davie Street fire. Do you think you can write it? Well, I'll try. So wrote it, and when we got into the strategy and tactics, you know, I tried to write us up as a fairly sophisticated fire department utilizing instant command in the article. And the article was edited a couple of times. Chief Powell had Marilyn Brown, who used to work as a book editor. She was on emergency management to edit the article. Anyway, that led to Chief Powell liked what he saw, he liked what he read, and he called me up in his office, and me and Frank, and he said, let's do it. And we were given the go-ahead to implement it, probably 86, late 85, early 86, and we started with staff officers. Paul Brooks taught that class. Paul was a captain teaching assistant chiefs and deputy chiefs, and he was as nervous as a cat on a roof, but he did a heck of a job. As far as mentors go, and you know, we've all been given these questions before we come in here for the interview. If I name one, I could name 200. There's so many people, so many guys that influenced my career. I'm sitting here talking to one right now. I remember the first conversation you and I and Sid had in the boot room at Station 3. So I can't, so many guys that I've seen their interviews so far that influenced my career, that influenced so many pieces of it, so many parts of it. If I name one, if I try to name them all, I'm gonna leave somebody out and I'm not gonna feel good about it. So I can name one that I spent the most time with and probably had the most influence on me as a chief of a department later on, and that was Frank Jones. Frank had a motto that I always loved. When we work hard, and when we play hard, and there's time for both. And that was what I enjoyed about going to work under Frank Jones every day. You put in some hard, long hours, but you always had a good time doing it. Proudest moments on the fire department, I've got two. 1991, we got a Class 1. The prior administration had told us we would never be a Class 1, we can never afford it. Jones made chief, I think, in 87 or 88, and he turned a group of young whippersnappers loose, and we started working towards a Class 1. And there was quite a few of us, but we believed we could be a Class 1. You fast forward 3 years, and all of a sudden we are one of 13 in the United States. We're the only one in North Carolina. Yeah, up until that point, I think there was a lot of us that knew we were a great fire department, but all you heard about was Charlotte, and you heard about Raleigh, and you heard about Phoenix, but all of a sudden, Greensboro was a Class 1, and not by just a little bit, by a pretty good margin. Fast forward 7 years, 6 years, and we're accredited. One of the first 5 in the United States. We were a beta site for that accreditation process, and I will never forget the last meeting we had with the assessors. They sat down with us after their review of us for 3 or 4 days, and they said, this fire department is a stallion running at full gallop, and you guys have got to learn how to slow it down for the long haul. Well, that made us feel very good. And then you fast forward, a year or two, whatever it was, and we're one of the first 5 in the United States to be accredited, and we're the only one of that 5 that is a Class 1 and accredited. I tell you where the Greensboro Fire Department today came from. Paul Brooks and David Spears carried that ball as far as accreditation went. They went to Chicago, they took the classes, they brought it back, and they introduced it in the department, and we all went to work. And I was lucky enough to go to Dallas. It was David and Paul and Ray Flowers and I when we got that. And, we were on pins and needles because David and I were walking around the convention center while they were in there getting grilled, and we were talking guys from Tucson and some of these other places were up, and it was nerve-wracking, but to gain that distinction, I mean, you're one of the best in the world. What I do it all over again in a heartbeat. What's that old saying? If you do something you enjoy, you'll never work a day in your life. And I'm not saying it was all roses all the way through, but I can't think of anything else that I would have rather done with my life and my career. I trained a couple of females, Terry Wallace, Mitzi Rice. The only female that I ever worked with was Dee Staley, and that was actually after Dee became a staff officer. But never worked in a fire station, with even female firefighters. A successful firefighter. If you'd asked me that 35, 40 years ago to give you one answer today, I'll give you another one. Winston Churchill said that making a living is about what you get. Making a life is about what you give. I look at the people that do this job, and they give so much. That makes you successful in life because you're willing to sacrifice so much for the benefit of others. Individually, as a career goes, Did you obtain that goal that was right for you? There was guys that I look back on and I think, golly, they would have made a heck of a battalion chief. But they were fantastic captains and they were happy being captains, and that's what they wanted to be. I can think of one particular individual, all he ever wanted to do was drive and operate that vehicle. And I never could understand it because I thought he'd be a fantastic captain. But that's what made him happy. Everybody doing this job, I don't care what role they've got, if they're happy doing that particular role, they're successful. One of my favorite movies in this whole world is It's a Wonderful Life. And George Bailey, he thinks he never accomplished these things that he wanted to accomplish in life because he was always pulled back to Bedford Falls and the building and loan. And he thinks that the world would be so much better without him if he'd never been born. And he's given that opportunity to see that. And he sees that the world's not a very nice place when George Bailey never existed. And in this job, you know, you see some things that you directly impact. You know, you ride the calls, you perform a rescue, a CPR, whatever it may be. But there's so many other impacts that we have on people. You look back at the 5th grade school program that we had. How many of those kids that we all talked to 40 years ago, 30 years ago, carried those fire safety tips home to mom and dad and grew up and carried those fire safety tips and passed them on to their children? How many lives did we save just doing those things? So I don't think any of us ever will realize, you know, the impact that we've had on other people's lives. But, you know, success in the fire department is finding that role that fits you and you're happy doing it, because no matter what it is, you are making a significant contribution to the lives of other people that you'll never meet. People that had a significant impact on me, my parents, especially my dad. I went to the fire department in May, came out of training in August. He had a stroke in September and he died in November. I can't tell you the number of times I wish he had been around and I could have had a conversation with him.
I understand.
World War II vet, landed on Omaha Beach. I'll never forget Heather and I going to see Saving Private Ryan, my daughter Heather. And I watched that first 30 minutes and I turned around to her and I said, "You have no idea how lucky you and I are to be sitting here right now." So, my dad had a significant influence on me growing up. I think that influence would have changed a lot of paths and directions I took in my life after he passed away. So, of one person, yeah, it was my dad. My health is, I think, relatively good. Like everybody at our age, you know, you've got a few issues, but for the most part, I'm okay. As far as health impacts go, I know there were. You and I talked about it not long ago. We spent 5 hours one night without air packs, without any air whatsoever, in banner manufacturing, with plastic bottles burning all over the place. You know, so you know, there's a lot of things that you probably took in that have affected you that you may or may not be aware of. When we first came on, our air packs were demand type regulators, so you have no idea that what you may have sucked in. But I think for the most part, the job was better for me, health-wise, than detrimental, because my last 8 years in another department, we had a mandatory physical fitness test we had to pass every year. So I had to work out on a pretty regular basis just to pass that test each year, because that meant my job. So I think that kept me active longer. As far as my family goes, I loved them. I did the best I could. There's things that I wish I could go back and change. I was saved when I was 10 years old. Left I don't know if you say you leave your faith, or you just didn't practice your faith, or you just ignored your faith. But bringing my kids up, I didn't bring them up in the church. I wished I had, because as I've gotten older, and fortunately God has let me live long enough to be this age, I see His hand in so many things. And I wished I had raised my kids that way. And one of the things that I spend a great deal of time on now is my walk in the Word and imparting those lessons that I have learned, not just to my children, but to my grandchildren. I found a passage just several years ago, Proverbs 16:9, man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. So we can all talk about those individual goals and objectives that we may have. Well, you may reach them, you may not, but it's not your decision. You can think you're in control, but you're not. And the paths that I took in certain situations were not the right paths, and somebody directed me in a different direction. He was right, I was wrong. He'll always be right, and I'll always be wrong. But I know well enough now to know He's got a better plan for me and for my family than I do. Yeah, there were several big fires that I was on through the years, but I'm not going to talk about a big fire so much as I am about a particular day. I think we're somewhere around June or July, August of 81. Rick and I were on the squad, and Joe, his son's got an all-star tryout down at Latham Park. So we're going to go down there and watch on the pretense we were going to get some gas. Cap sorry didn't care. He was fine. As we're going down there, a call comes into the Carolina Theater. So Rick and I decide, if there's anything to this, they're going to be calling a second, possibly a third alarm. So we decide we're going to orbit downtown Greensboro on the squad. And we no sooner got close, and they called a second alarm in a full, working fire. We were down there, most of them, all morning long, and probably half the afternoon. I know it was the only fire in my life. And Rick and I both, each one of us used 9 Scott Bobs. That's how much in and out, because we just couldn't find it. And it was a hot day. It was in the 90s. I remember they said there was brass they had found in the upper floors that had melted. Brass melts at 1,500 degrees. So gives you some idea how hot it was. It's one of the only time on fire I wished I would pass out so I could get out of it, because we just in and out. Finally, we get relieved from that. We go back to the station, and you know what it is. You're wore out, you're tired, but you got to clean the trucks up and get them back in service. We had the trucks back in service maybe about 45 minutes. Strong electrical storm comes through. We end up on a 2-alarm apartment fire for another 2 or 3 hours. That was the toughest day of fires I ever had. I remember we were supposed to play softball that night. We were 15-0. This was regular league play. We went out there, we'd be 16-0, and we just forfeited and said, you guys can have it, because we're out playing ball tonight. What I miss most about the fire department is the people. And I'll say this about any fire department, the collection of people that you have, they can do anything. They could run any business, they could run any company. I don't care if it's technology or computers or flying airplanes or whatever the case might be. Those talents are there. But to bring that group of people together, somehow they come together, and sacrifice those other things, to serve humankind. It's very rare. but it's the people. I mean, just fantastic people from all walks of life, from all kinds of backgrounds, and you come together and you develop that bond around that occupation, that calling, if you will. I don't know if it's to most of us, it's never a job. It never was a job. It's a calling. It's just something inside of us. I used to say it's something inside our DNA that just makes us want to do that job. In the 80s, we went through a big growth. The city annexed, I can't remember, but several square miles of northwest Guilford County. We opened Station 18, Station 19, and
17.
17, yeah. So I think Paul and I, we had a recruit class back to back to back. We had, I'm trying to remember the dates. 84, we had a huge recruit class. I think it was 30 or 31. No sooner finished that class, we turned around and had another class of 12. And then as soon as we finished that class, we had a class of close to 30 again. And that was to fill the slots in those 3 stations. We even were so needing to make the personnel so bad. I know with 2 of the classes, I think it was 2 of them, we were doing 6 8-hour days to get them out a little bit quicker. So yeah, we had a big growth due to that annexation. And yeah, those stations actually started out, I think 19 started out in a mobile home, 18 and 17 started out in houses with an apparatus built on the side of it. And walk out the door on week 16 or 18. The transition was the most satisfaction I ever had in the job. As far as a special message go, you know, with my kids and my grandkids, I'll do that some other time, because every recruit class I ever had, and I trained 5 or 6, I was hard on. I was hard on because when they walked out of that door, I wanted them to be able to do the job from day one. I look back on those guys. There's one of them sitting right there. I loved them. They were my kids. Did I practice tough love on them? Yeah. But I hope they realized and noticed as they got closer and closer to graduation day, I started easing off on them because I saw the growth and I saw that they were getting prepared, and then they finally were prepared to go out there and do that job. But sometimes I look back and I think, you know, was I too hard on today? I went crazy about my training supervisor. Yeah, and I don't, it would bother me if they had hard feelings towards me, because I did love them and I felt like they were my children. And one of the greatest pleasures that I've had through the years is seeing them grow and develop and go to the different positions that they went to and the jobs that they did. Because I was a training officer with Randy Parrish and a training officer with Paul Brooks. And I think we picked great people, we graduated great people, and they went on to do great things. And if there's any individual accomplishment that I'm most proud of, it's being a training officer. If I could go back and do it all over again, I would have probably never left training, because that was the best job I ever had. Seeing a group of people walk in the door on day one and walk out the door on week 16 or 18, the transition was the most satisfaction I ever had in the job.
In closing, the Greensboro Firefighters History Book Committee hopes you have gained a greater insight into the dangers, the challenges, and emotional events that have influenced and shaped the American firefighter.